This session is adopting organic land management practices, investing in success. The idea that this whole alternative form of management is, really the pesticide discussion and everything that we just heard from Tyrone and all of the, all the bad news. The good news is that we figured it out from the land management perspective, so it becomes a moot point. We just don't need pesticides to manage because the group of professionals that we have here today have successfully implemented strategies that are being employed to manage land without the use of chemicals. So we're going to have 5 of us speak and talk about different aspects and what they do and their unique role in all of this. So we each are going to do about 8 to 10 minutes as an overview of what we all do, and then there'll be breakout workshops that will then go into greater detail into some of these things. Our first speaker is John Bochert. John works with Eldridge Lumber and Hardware in York, Maine, which is an Ace Hardware affiliate. He works with and for Scott Eldridge, back up here in the room, who both of them are good friends, worked with them very closely. And they're going to tell their story, how they transitioned their Ace Hardware affiliate into all pesticide-free options for land management, which is really exciting. They did this in 2015, and the first in the country to do this.
Item is actually in
John.
progress.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Chip, and thanks everybody for having us here. Scott and I both, when we got the invitation to come here, we were both a little skeptical to start with. Not only our anxiety about taking off and landing in a plane, but doing it twice. It had us in a little bit in a snit. But we decided in the long run, for such an invitation, if we got to our deathbeds, we would regret not coming here. And so far, I'm really glad that we came. Our story starts. This is a retail story, and apparently, so far, we're one member of a one-person club. I keep hoping every time we come here that there'll be a coalition of retailers in the corner, but it never seems to happen. But if we can encourage people to do that, then we can hopefully make some progress. My story, I'm starting my 29th year in lawn and garden retail. I've loved every minute of it, working outside, even in the days when I sold chemicals, and I've sold a lot of chemicals in my day. I was ready to retire to my home and my wife and my pets, and a man dragged me away from my retirement. Scott Eldridge. Scott is right there in the green shirt. Scott, say hello there. The man that stole my retirement and made me a productive member of society again. The first thing we did in 2014, Scott wanted a mission statement. This is something I was very comfortable with, and you'll recognize that any lawn care place, lawn and garden place you go to will have the chemical section, and they have an alternative organic section. And for Scott and I, it turned out that we moved all the chemicals to the back and decided to maximize our customers' knowledge of appreciation of organic products and techniques and to minimize synthetic products. Little did we know that our customers themselves really pushed us ahead. So what I'm going to talk about here very briefly, because we're running late, we talk about it more in the workshops, is some of the problems or some of the issues that we deal with our customers every day. As I said, they pushed us to go almost all organic. There are still a few rodenticides and a few wasp and hornet killers in the what I call the chemical alternative aisle. But the organic aisle, the first thing you see when you turn the corner is a section I like to call the living soil. If I can convince customers of the universe below our feet that we can't see, and this is one of the most convincing arguments I think there is in organics today, as we always talk about protecting this life in the soil. And the way I say it to people is we're using organic fertilizers and organic amendments, mineralization, all for these critters that live below us. Unseen, but doing a job, very efficient job of feeding nutrients from dead organic matter to the roots of plants. I let the customers know that this process has been going on since there were plants on the earth about 400 million years. And then I say, are you going to go with nature, what nature's been doing for 400 million years, or what man has been doing since World War II? And anybody that has thought about these issues at all falls in line with this, and it works out quite nicely. We have I'll show you here, I think, oh, and this is my favorite. This is the one that, this is a quote I got from Jay, an organic farmer in Florida, and I never got over it. 2 years ago now, I heard that phrase, and I think it can be something more. But anyway, this is in the first section, the living soil section, just to explain what's going on and what they're about to get involved with when they get involved with organics. So I won't pause long enough for you to read that. Here's another very important, you'll see this 4 or 5 times in the store. We're papering the walls with information. We're in the education business. We're advocates. We're babysitters. We're consultants. And I like these bumper sticker things that I can put on the wall that really describe what we're all about. Little parables. This is one of them that I picked up. And again, you show this to people and talk about what kind of money and time and things they've been spending on killing 3% of their problem. Clover story. Anybody who comes in looking for grass seed gets the white clover story. I don't know if it's the same here in California. I'm not sure if the white clover is prevalent here. White clover was a part of every grass seed mix until the 1960s, until the chemical companies decided that it was no longer allowed. I don't remember any people screaming that we want less clover in our lawns. In those days, there was a lot of clover. It fixes nitrogen from the air, so the chemical company sells you a product to kill the clover, and then they sell you another product to give you the nitrogen that you lost when you killed their clover. Tell that story to somebody, and that is another parable of the kind of problems we're in and the kind of thing they should be paying attention to. We have an organic garden that we started a quarter mile from the store, 2 organic greenhouses to grow our own plants, and I like to put up pictures of the results that we're getting for the help and for the customers. There's me with a tomato. That's a hillbilly potato leaf tomato. Delicious and beautiful seedlings. We're learning how to germinate seeds again. Nobody germinates seeds in the greenhouse business anymore. You buy plugs. They come from all around the world. The only way to be sure the plants are clean is to germinate your own, and we're learning how to do that quite well. We get spectacular results. We're not all organic in the plant department, but we try to do quite a few. This is another big one. The workshop that I was just in was talking about native plants and how important they are and the diversity in our landscapes. Too many homes today, you see the sweeping lawn, they take away 1,000 species when they build a house and put back 2 or 3. We need to have the native species back in. In Maine, we're blessed with a good organic community. And this Rebel Hill Farm, for instance, we sold 500 of these perennials within a month. We'll sell 1,000 this year. And we're also teaming up with some trees and shrubs too. I was going to mention a couple of things. Red cedar oil is my favorite insecticide. Vinegar is my favorite herbicide. But don't tell anybody I told you, because I'll be in trouble with the Maine Board of Pesticide Control. Little things like this to tell people what kind of chemicals we're using. Information everywhere. Soil tests, a rack of soil tests on the right-hand side. You can pick up a 7-step organic lawn care program and detailed life cycles of crabgrass, so get people to understand exactly what their enemy is and how to work the environment and the systems to lessen the problem. Weed killers. These are organic weed killers next to flamethrowers. This is my living soil. Cover crops in the bottom there, and then more information. You can your basic organic insecticides can be counted on one hand, so it's very easy to give all the information on each one. There's the organic aisle, and that's it. I thank you all for listening. We'll get into more detail in the workshop as much as you want. Okay? Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce to you Lisa Novick. Lisa is the Director of Outreach at the Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants. Since joining the foundation in 2007, Ms. Novick designed and implemented its K-12 Education and Landscaping for Resilience, the LFR programs, and has designed and installed dozens of native landscapes in public spaces across the LA region. Lisa.
Okay, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to Garrett and Jay for having invited our foundation to be a participant. We really appreciate this opportunity. Let me get a quick show of hands for how many of you landscape native right now, wherever you live? Okay, that's pretty great. All right. So with that, I'll get started because I'm kind of pressed for time here. Basically, what you are about to see is why it is so important to landscape native. And it's all of an attempt to show you how the shift in mentality occurs from thinking of bugs as the enemy and continually buying into the pesticide, synthetic fertilizer sort of habit, and how if you switch to native plants, you're actually helping the ecosystems. You don't need pesticides because first of all, you don't want to use them. You want those critters in your yard. So, and I'll have a lot of information about where you can get native plants in your region and how this is a movement that is sweeping the country, not just through native plant nuts, but through all sorts of other nonprofits that recognize the benefits that native landscaping can have for the country as a whole, for the watersheds, for the soil health, and for building healthy food webs that give us ecosystem types of services. So the native landscaping, plays into everything. All right, so in a nutshell, 55% of our land use in the United States is for urban and suburban uses. So 41% is for agriculture, and only 4% of our wildlands are left. 4% is not enough to give us the ecosystem services that we need for our own well-being. So what we do in that 55% matters. But instead, we do ornamental horticulture. So this is Kew Gardens. And these places were established, as you all probably know, as royal gardens that then became centers that signified the learning and the cultural breadth of the monarch. But then, and then when people traveled to distant lands, brought back the exotic plants, hitherto unknown to Western science, they brought them back here, and the exotic plants were like the Rolex watches of their day. So ornamental horticulture is 19th century. It was great when we had so many more pollinators, so many more animals at that time in the Earth's history, but that's not the case anymore. And when these plants were brought back and put into the royal gardens, the public caught on and thought, hey, if it's good enough for the monarch, I would like some too, and it became fashionable. So don't get me wrong, I love the explorers' accounts of the scientists that went out and actually mapped scientifically what is where. They're thrilling. But what's happened is that ornamental horticulture has outlived its usefulness. It's based on a paradigm that does not work for the problems that we face. And yet, if you go to Osh, Lowe's, Home Depot, Armstrong's, all these places, you try to find a native plant, it's virtually impossible. Their business model is totally keyed into the synthetic fertilizer and the use of pesticides, and then selling you plants that aren't adapted to the region that probably die, and then you're a repeat customer. So ornamental horticulture is non-native. And just as we need to transition to the use of solar and wind energy from fossil fuels, we need to transition to native from ornamental landscaping. So if you look at an ornamental nursery in the southern part of California, it has many of the same species like pansies and lantana that you'd see at a nursery in France. So the problem with this is that Ornamental landscaping devastates the specialized coevolutionary relationships that have evolved over thousands to millions of years in places. And so let's just take a look at some landscapes that are the ornamental horticultural model. So you've got, lawn and standard trees and shrubs, foundation and anchor plants that are sold across the globe. In Southern California, we use creeping fig and palms from Southeast Asia, New Zealand flax, or, maples from Japan, impatiens from Eastern Africa, fountain grass from North Africa, still being sold. High fire problem, not good, but it's still being sold. Then the latest horticultural rage is Mexican feathergrass and kangaroo paws from Australia. And then there's always boxwood and roses from Europe, and then the ubiquitous kind of carrotwood trees from Australia. So none of these support the ecosystem. If you look at a non-native landscape, it's green, it'll have flowers, but it's virtually sterile, just because it has torpedoed the specialized coevolutionary relationships that are the rule in nature, not the exception, but the rule. So ornamental is unsustainable in water, in the energy use, and in the pesticides that the non-native plants need for those that are vulnerable to the generalist insects that are leaf-eating species. Then ornamental plants are unsustainable because they shred the food web. So just to drill down to look at what we face in California and why natives are so important for decreasing people's willingness to use pesticides and cutting our water use. Drought is normal in our state. Most of our growth was based on a wet period, which was an anomaly. Then in Los Angeles, households use 50 to 70% of their water on landscaping. We steal that water from already harmed ecosystems that cannot afford to lose the water, and then we bring it to LA and we use it on plants that don't feed people and don't feed wildlife. It's insane. So ornamental horticulture is a paradigm for the 19th century that has outlived its usefulness. It does not approach what we face, the problems we face now. So we've lost 52% of the world's vertebrate wild animals in the last 50 years, pollinators, all sorts of other things taking a nosedive. An extinction rate that's 1,000 times faster than the normal rate. Plus, drought, temperature extremes, depletion of groundwater, and an unconscionable use of pesticides. So what's a person to do? What's available to them to do right where they live? You can landscape native. So native, adapted to rainfall. Soil, you don't need soil amendments or fertilizers. They like the soil exactly as it comes. It's adapted to climate. Wildlife, and wildlife is adapted to it. So native plants, insects, and animals co-evolved, specialized co-evolutionary relationships. 90% of all leaf-eating insect species can eat only native plants. They're the foundation of the food web. It takes 3,000 caterpillars to feed one nest of 4 baby birds in 17 days until they fledge. Native plants make 35 times more caterpillars than non-native plants. If we don't have natives, our birds struggle. So insects are essential. And native gardens shift the mindset to have people welcome the insects, because they're planting the plants that support the caterpillars that then become the butterflies. And once people begin to understand that in a native garden, having a little tiny hole in your leaf is fine. It's fine. A perfect leaf should be an ugly leaf, because it means your garden is basically dead. All right, so this is a book that everybody needs to read. It's by an entomology prof on the East Coast. Fabulous book, tons of data, great book. So if we want to make sustainable cities that are resilient and support the nature of where we live, we plant native. There are native plant societies across the United States, and they can tell you where to get native plants for your garden. There's the California Native Plant Society, Maryland, Florida, Minnesota, and Texas, for instance. If you want to know about native plants in California by zip code, go to calscape.org. Nationwide, go to the Native Plant Conservation Campaign website, and that will put you on to the affiliates and various places for native plants. So Surfrider, National Wildlife Federation, and all these other groups have implemented different kinds of programs to get people to landscape native because they realize that it ties into so much of what we do that we could do so much better. So grow local, plant native. And as the Lorehex says, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all you do. It's heartening to know that so many people are working to make things better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Now we have Johnny Gonzales of Environmental Land Management. Johnny is the Field Operations Manager for Environmental Land Management, ELM. He herds goats to eat away at large sections of brown, overgrown, and flammable brush. In addition to using, those goats for weed mitigation, the secondary benefits that maybe a lot of us don't think about. The hoof action of the goat actually loosens and aerates the soil. They poop and they pee, they deliver irrigation water, they deliver fertilizer, and then a lot of times, if you come back in with native plant seed, you can start a new ecosystem. So a very valuable process that is widespread now over the country and becoming more so. So with that, Johnny?
Hello and thank you. Well, to me, you guys have been listening to what I would call the big dogs. I've been overwhelmed listening to everybody here speak and pose their jobs, their positions, their views of the world and the facts that they're all trying to cope with. And now you get the opportunity to talk to the flea on the dog. And that what I mean by that is that we're out there daily doing things in what we term as the WUI. In the wild-urban interface, it seems like a very easy environment. It's easy. There's people, there's open spaces, we stay out of nature's way, we keep the people safe. There should be some common ground here. And I find myself daily going, how did I get here? Very much like this meeting, how did I get here? I'm unqualified. There is not enough labor. There's not enough understanding. There's not enough resources. There's not enough information. And then when you dig into it, it's like there's a lot of information. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of reasons people should be here and be involved. And I started this as a commercial landscaper, a commercial tree trimmer, and I tried to recruit somebody to take care of a neighborhood that was a goat herder. And 3 different times he failed. On the 3rd time, the people called me on it. So I had to take his goats and do it. And again, I went, how did I get here? I was like, what am I doing? And I learned a lot of things that you guys want to ask. What are the benefits of goats? How do you take care of them? How are they going to act with people? What's going to be the complications? To me, it was real easy. They eat the plants. We're trying to create a fire break. I wasn't so much thinking as environmental impact because I was staying out of what I thought the environment was. And I was doing the people a favor to keep them safe. So I thought this was going to be a good resource for the people. They're going to support me. And I found myself in the middle of a war. Environmentally, the people don't see this as environmental reasons. Commercially, people don't see this and how should I say, politically, as a viable reason to get the people to rally. And then when I stated that I was here to try to get a community safe, and it was a principle, because I came from a fire background for the purpose of what I was doing this, and you're not going to get a slide. Again, I work outdoors, and I really don't have time to be doing a lot of the computer work that I find myself begging and pleading for people to do for me, along with my contracts, because of the 104 pages that I have to go through for federal contracts, state contracts, city contracts, and some of the local HOAs. I find myself into legal battles. But those are questions you're probably going to ask, and you're wondering, how do you guys get through? In 20 years, I found myself working with so many ologists, I don't remember everybody's names. I work with staffs of PhDs that I sometimes am surprised they're working with me, for me, or somehow they're following me. I have no reason, I know how that happened. We do jobs that go, like, say there's a demo in Chula Vista of a power plant. Okay, easy. They're going to restore this. They're going to make it a park. It's a natural. And I was wanting it. All of a sudden, I got a phone call. I got it. I go, oh no, what am I going to do? So I found out because of this paperwork that I had to clear it through the Clean Water Act. There's different Clean Water Acts. I had to get the Coastal Commission. I had to do all this. And lo and behold, as always, I relied on a staff of people that are these very ologists I'm trying to explain that are in the world. And these doctors, these PhDs, and I called on Davis, and we got some answers. So then from that, we're able to get the Coastal Commission to understand that goats interacting in the waterways do not transmit pathogens of sizable amounts. And we got a Dr. Atwell to break it down into simple terms. And excuse me about emotional. With me, it's, in church they call this a gift of crying, and I call it a pain in the butt. I can't do anything without being passionate about it. And this job is more of a calling than it is my job. And you cannot endure this. Nobody knows how hard it is to pull all this together when I'm not qualified, and the people who are dependent on grants, and the people who need them are dependent on budgets. So it comes back to another kind of science that I never thought I'd have to be involved in. It's like, why me? There's social sciences and there's these political sciences. And one feeds off the other. It's symbiotic. It's so much like my animals, as I learned, the dogs, the goats, the environment. What I didn't know, and I go, okay, I got this problem. How do I become working in the environment aspect of this? So I look for these names and I go, environmental land management was available, and I was going in and I go, that's a great name. I'm going to pick this name for my business, environmental land management. And then I got it. I go, oh no, why did I do this again? Because immediately you're not qualified. Immediately you have you're targeted from the right and the left. Immediately you can't really do anything right. And the other big thing that I realized, I live in Southern California, and I absolutely love it. More so, I live in Carlsbad. And when I get off of work, I look forward to going home to go outdoors in Carlsbad. And the more I work, the more I find myself in Orange County, and Orange County is not so bad, in Los Angeles. So I only work in Southern California. I can address the things for different regions. But again, coming to the social and political, because there's very little time. When I started this in 1998, 1999, I got calls from all over the country, Albuquerque, New York, South Carolina, Washington. And then what I realized is all these different universities that I've been working with, Texas A&M, LSU, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, UC Davis, even Cornell. You would be surprised what the state vet and everybody has pulled together to try to find the right ecological, biological answers for goats in these ecosystems. And the only thing I could say, because time's going to run out, I'll answer a lot later, is that these agencies are working their tails off. And we are just workers. And what the community needs to understand, there needs to be a value in these open spaces that workers are important. And one of the big reasons I brought the goat in, because we were working our tails off, and I couldn't keep the workers working in those hills enough to do fire mitigation. But they do a lot more than that. People think they eat, they poop, they transfer seeds. Guess what? Goat droppings have no seeds viable. They leave the environmental seeds out. Goats work a lot on the invasive plants, Mediterranean climate, not indigenous to North America goats. We have some wild ones, but they're not the goats that we know as domestic. So the things that they actually address, and they'll eat readily because of tannins and alkaloids and all these chemicals, and these goats, these herbivores, are great chemical processing mechanisms. they know to selectively do this before our native plants and these tannins and alkaloids actually get regulated in their body. The proteins bind in different ways. And again, there's studies being done to help address what we need to do. So no, goats are not going to take care of everything. Goats are not a magic bullet, but they have such a value in the toolbox. And people need to start opening their minds to how are you going to replace something that's powerful with power. You're going to have to combine labor and modern agriculture, because we live in an environmental world, and somehow nature has to come back. And that's all I can say right now.
Thank you, Johnny. That was great. Now we have Scott Smith. Scott is the Deputy Director of Public Works here in Irvine, and he is tasked with the responsibility of overseeing the organic land management program here as guided and directed by City Council. So that is, something that, was sort of given to him, probably something new that he hadn't been directly involved with before, and is now turning this into be a viable operational strategy that is going to serve to educate others as we, begin to move forward in this.
Yes, my name is Scott Smith, Deputy Director of Public Works of the City of Irvine, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining us in the City of Irvine for this forum. Just to help me out, as a show of hands, could those that are in the public sector that do landscape maintenance, could you raise your hand just so I can know who I'm speaking with? So it's a limited audience, but it's good to know that some of us are here. And just as background, I want to give you a little information on the City of Irvine. It's a planned community, and there's a purpose for me saying this is because I want you to understand the context of what we contend with as part of our duties. It is a planned community that's developed in villages, and as a result of that, there's a lot of parks. Any of you that have spent time in Irvine or live in Irvine realize that those parks are spread out and are interconnected with a wide variety of trails and corridors that need to be maintained. So there's 66 square miles in the City of Irvine. There's 2,000 lane miles in the City of Irvine. That's equivalent from Irvine to Detroit, Michigan. The reason I bring that up is because weeds tend to grow in the road too, and so we got to maintain those. 570 acres of parkland, athletic fields, and there are 60 community and neighborhood parks. 60. 900 acres of public right-of-way, that right-of-way I was talking about, all those miles, and 975 miles of sidewalk, 73,000 trees. We have more than 1.5 million square feet of facilities that we need to maintain, which is about 3 times the size of the Honda Center where they'll be having the Stanley Cup playoffs tonight. So in 2016, the City of Irvine, the council adopted an integrated pest management program. And what it was, an organics first program. And one of the guiding principles was to limit exposure to any pesticides, limit exposure of any pesticides where children and the general public congregate. This is a tiered approach to this policy, and it starts with organic pesticides when they're needed. So the city is an early adopter of this program. And compared to other cities in this area, there wasn't really anybody else that we can learn from. So we started in this adventure, and it's been great. There was a fairly steep learning curve, though. And one of the challenges, and we get contacted by other municipalities, one of the challenges is changing the mindset. And I've been hearing in the conference, and I'm sure that all of you have faced that, is anytime there's change, it doesn't matter whether it be this item or another item, it's very difficult for people to want to change gears and do things differently. So that's been part of the challenge that we've had, but we have been successful in working with staff and also communicating with others outside of our organization. And then the other thing that we faced was limited products. At the time that we adopted this, there really wasn't that many products available that were registered in California. So that made it pretty difficult for us to move forward. But just like any new industry, that's one of the things you have to deal with. As the industry develops more, there'll be more products available, which will make our job easier. We continually are trying new products. We have good communication with the local residents, and such as Ms. Conte. I know that my staff speaks with her. Anytime new products come out, we're willing to try them and check their effectiveness. One of the things you may want to know is what advice would we give as the city of Irvine to other cities that are considering adopting this policy? Don't be overwhelmed. That'd probably be the first one. Sometimes when you take on something that is such a large area, like all what we have to maintain, the first thing is to be overwhelmed. Don't be overwhelmed with this type of effort. Second, start on a smaller scale. If you're going to be overwhelmed, then just start on a smaller scale, focus on the priority areas where you're going to have the highest exposure, those where you can help the most as far as children and adults that are going to be exposed. While you're doing your program, take time to collect data. Refine the program, compare the results of the organic area versus the traditional methods, and educate along the way. People, citizens, from our perspective, there's a broad spectrum of how they respond. And if you can educate along the way, it's very helpful because you don't know if they're supportive or if they're not, and what their expectations are really dictate a lot of the conversations. If they're used to seeing something a certain way and there's even the slightest change, then you have a very upset resident that it takes a lot of time to explain what's going on. And if you can educate along the way, it really helps with the whole process and also helps with understanding of what's being done. And then finally, I'd say establish a policy. Once you've stepped through that and you have a good understanding of what you can do, you educate along the way, both the citizens, the elected officials, the staff can all come together on this. It really makes the opportunity for a great program. So that's my presentation, Shemp. Thank you very much.
Okay, so all right, could you cue up my presentation? Got just a few pictures. So, the idea of this panel is to promote, different perspectives. So I'm going to be basically speaking to you about the non-native landscape, the managed landscape, and there's always going to be a place for that managed landscape. And I, don't think that it's all going to go away, and it probably won't always go away because we need public spaces for, a variety of things. I just work on a national level as a consultant, and what I do is I teach how to do things in non-chemical strategies. I do lots of work in natives. I do lots of work in open space. Everything I do involves pesticide reduction and eventual elimination. So that is my driving factor. Jay and I worked on a national park. This is one of the national parks in Lake Erie. So we talk about policy. What's this all about? How do we want to institutionalize this? So we want to institutionalize these natural practices, these organic practices. Scott talked to us about that, the policy. The policy can be bottom up or top down. We engage in discussion. It's non-confrontational. Seeing is believing, the pilot project that he mentioned. You don't have to start with the whole city. You can start small. It can involve goats. It can involve managed lands. It can be involved ripping up grass. And I'm one of the grass people that says there's too much grass in the world. Grass is non-native, and a lot of it should be taken away and turned into alternatives. But then again, there's a lot that will not be. Institutionalizing the practices, that's really what's important. So the pesticide debate, we've heard a lot about pesticides in the last day and a half. It's becoming a moot point because alternatives work. They work. We simply don't need pesticides to do what we historically have been taught that we need to do. We can be cost neutral or a little bit higher in year one, cost less than conventional by year three. The system functions with less input. So there's resistance. What's the resistance to bringing in goats, to managing land organically, to ripping up, the highly managed landscape and installing natives there? fear of failure. Something's going to be different. There's a lack of education, a reluctance to change, an inability to focus on the biological complex of the soil. The most important thing of any landscape we deal with is what we don't see. It's what's underneath that surface that drives the whole process. John said it perfectly, the microbes drive the bus. That's exactly what's happening. Industry propaganda telling us that you can't do it without these products that we unleashed on you 60 plus years ago, that you have to use this to have a successful landscape. The excuse that only chemicals can grow plants to meet high expectations. Overused grass like you see here in Irvine on the athletic fields that are pounded hour and hour, day after day, that only responds to synthetic chemistry. So adopting these alternative practices leads to success. Here is diversity in a landscape that otherwise would be highly managed, but bringing in alternative strategies. My comment, too much grass in the world. But we need to, what we does remain, we need to learn how to manage it organically without synthetics. So here is that crafted, cookie cutter landscape on a large estate property, and everything is as it appears. This is one of the projects I work on, and we are gradually getting rid of a lot of this and returning it to natives. And that is the client was very resistant, but now she realizes that that's a goal. So I went and did this without ever telling her and took out several thousand feet of her grass and composted it, and it's now all native material. And she thinks it's her idea, and she absolutely loves it. So we've introduced that in there, and here's a person that never had any idea that this was an option and now has fully embraced it, so it's education. Organic by neglect is sometimes the general public's perception. I don't do anything, therefore I'm organic. Organic implies a proactive, thoughtful approach to management. A series of preventative steps builds a resilient system. Organic nowadays isn't even good enough, because one of the first things people ask me is, what's my swap out? What is my organic product option? This is what I use chemically. Just tell me the list of products to use. That will fail every single time. So now the concept we have to think about is regenerative. The process that we use and the products we use restore and build the health in soils. We're not simply looking to swap out products, but we're looking to change things down in the soil and restore it to good health. Conventionally, we were taught to look at soil as chemistry, structure, and biology unrelated to each other, and now we know that it really is all related, and we learn how those interactions happen. We operate on a systems-based approach. Jay mentioned this in his opening remarks. We're managing as a system that involves the understanding of biological life in the soil, the exclusive use of natural organic product in whatever we're doing, and then those cultural practices that are actually the most important that make the whole system work. We have soil biological life, and the most important focus is on the biological life. We have to begin to learn to move away from NPK and move on to those simple things like molasses or kelp or humic acids to feed and nurture and grow the biological life. Here's a before and after picture taken 12 months apart, and this was a low nitrogen biologically driven program. This landscape is right here in Irvine and is now being managed from the fertility being 100% chemical free. All that understory. There's a college campus in New England where clover is part of that lawn because that's the aesthetic they want, and they don't really have to fertilize this because nature is doing it for them. University Hospital, Case Medical Center in downtown Cleveland. This has now been organic. This was a Beyond Pesticides project where we taught and we instructed and we brought contractors in, and this is now managed chemical-free. Residential property where we're bringing in all kinds of diverse plant material, and underneath all that grass is a monoculture of moss that the client continually wanted to rip out. We left it because that was the native. That was the plant that really wanted to be there. So if we go there in January, all you see is moss. If you go there on the 4th of July, you see the grass. So that's a blend of native and non-native. President and Mrs. Hoover's gravesite, another project that Jay and I got involved with as we managed 10 or 12 national parks and taught the National Park Service how to be sustainable, how to get rid of chemicals, and how to maintain the same high expectations. This project was so successful, it was immediately moved after the 3-year pilot project into multiple acres of the rest of this property. Highly managed sports field. Typically non-native, absolutely non-native, but the idea that this performs a function. And this is a function that needs to be remained. And this particular field has been all natural since 2002. So the long-term ability, a horse pasture that receives less than 25% of the nitrogen fertilizer of any other pasture in New England. Because the day that this was constructed, the strong focus was on establishing the biological framework in the soil so that we would let natural processes take over in time. So we used a little bit of fertilizer to get it established, and now we don't have to because nature is actually cycling that all for us. Maui, Jay and I have a project in Maui. Even these kinds of very, very, scripted landscapes, the idea that we can begin to learn to remove chemistry from them and allow natural process to take over. And just up in Malibu, Pepperdine University, Division I soccer field, NCAA field. This has just completed its first year of removing most pesticides and introducing compost and organic fertilizers, and actually exceeded our expectations in that we now have the soccer coach texting the grounds crew asking what's going on, what's different, why do we have so much more cushion and all of that under our feet. So the idea that we can take easy sites and then very difficult sites and make them work in a non-chemical framework. So that's it, and a lot of this will end up being followed up in some of the various workshops that we have. So I think we have a little bit of a break now, and then we'll move on to the afternoon workshop block. Thank you.